There are 7 lies men over 50 have been told their entire lives, and most still believe them. These aren't the kind of lies you hear once and forget. They're the kind that get planted early, repeated so often, they start to feel like truth. They're baked into conversations with your father, advice from your teachers, the movies you watched growing up, even the quiet expectations of your friends and family. And without realizing it, you carry them for decades. They shape the way you work, love, and see yourself. They dictate your choices, your ambitions, your relationships, and the most dangerous part, you don't even notice the weight until the damage has already been done. By the time most men hit their 40s or 50s, something begins to crack. It's subtle at first, just a nagging feeling that the map you've been following might not actually lead anywhere you want to go. You did everything right, you showed up on time, you worked hard, you followed the rules, you became the reliable one, the responsible one. And yet, fulfillment feels like it's always one step out of reach. The house is there, the career is there, the retirement plan might even be there. But so is a quiet restlessness, an uncomfortable sense that you've built a life around someone else's blueprint. Maybe you've been feeling it lately, that strange moment when the applause fades and you realize you don't actually care about the trophy you were chasing. That conversation where you suddenly wonder why you're explaining yourself as if you need permission to live on your own terms, or that late-night thought that hits you like a cold wind. If this is all there is, why doesn't it feel better? It's not that you failed, it's that you were told the wrong story. The truth is, men aren't just taught how to be men. We're taught a script, one that's outdated, restrictive, and frankly, designed to keep you predictable. We're told to work harder, climb higher, sacrifice more, and stay in line. We're told that success is about what we earn, what we own, and how useful we are to other people. And for a while, maybe that script works. It gives you direction, it gives you purpose, it gives you a role to play. But eventually, the role becomes a cage. You start to wonder who you are without the job title, without the responsibilities, without the endless problem solving for everyone else. You start to realize that half the things you've been chasing weren't even yours to begin with. They were inherited expectations, passed down like a suit that doesn't quite fit, but you keep wearing because it's what men do. And if you've ever tried to talk about this, you know how quickly the conversation gets awkward. People change the subject. They tell you to count your blessings or stop overthinking. They might even get defensive, as if questioning the system is a personal attack on them. But deep down, you know something's off. You can feel it in the way you hesitate before answering, how's work, or the way you bite your tongue instead of speaking up in your own marriage. You can feel it in the empty victories, the ones that look good on paper but leave you strangely hollow inside. Here's the thing. Unlearning these lies isn't about blowing up your life. It's not about walking away from your responsibilities or chasing some cliché midlife fantasy. It's about reclaiming the space to decide for yourself without guilt, without apology, what matters now. Because here's the truth. No one tells you once you see the lies for what they are, you can't unsee them. And once you stop living by them, everything starts to feel lighter, sharper, more honest. You'll stop waiting for permission to make changes you've been thinking about for years. You'll stop measuring yourself by someone else's scoreboard. You'll start showing up in your relationships as a whole person, not just the safe, convenient version people expect. It's not always comfortable. In fact, it can be deeply unsettling at first. But it's also the doorway to something most men over 50 never get to experience: the second half of life as your own man, not someone else's idea of one. So in this video, we're going to dismantle 7 of the biggest lies men over 50 have been told. Lies that keep you playing small, keep you second-guessing yourself, and keep you chasing the wrong kind of success. And as we go through each one, I'm not just going to tell you why it's false. I'm going to show you what happens when you let it go, and how life changes when you replace it with something real. Because if there's one thing I've learned after years of watching men hit this turning point, it's this: the moment you stop living by the wrong script, you finally give yourself permission to write the right one. And trust me, it's a hell of a lot better story. If you're ready to see these lies for what they really are, let's start with the very first one. The one that might be the hardest to let go of because it's been drilled into you since childhood. It's the belief that if you work hard, play by the rules, and keep your head down, life will work out. From the time you were a kid, you probably heard some version of this: work hard, follow the rules, stay in your lane, good things will happen. It was sold to you as the foundation of a good life. Maybe your father drilled it in. Maybe your teachers, maybe society just kept reinforcing it until it became part of your DNA. And for a long time, you believed it. You believed that if you just put your head down and kept grinding, showing up early, staying late, doing what was expected, life would eventually pay you back. You'd earn respect, stability, maybe even happiness. But somewhere around your 40s or 50s, you started to notice something. You were doing all the right things. You were dependable, you carried your share of the load, and then some. You avoided making waves. You followed the script to the letter. And yet, instead of fulfillment, what crept in was something else entirely. A quiet disappointment, a sense that you'd been playing a game whose scoreboard didn't even measure what actually mattered to you. Here's the part they never told you. Systems, whether it's corporate, social, or cultural, are not designed to reward your happiness. They're designed to reward your predictability, your reliability, your ability to show up and keep the gears turning without asking too many questions. And that's the problem. If you live your life asking the system to reward you with meaning, you're going to be waiting a long time. Because meaning isn't built into the rules, it's built into the choices you make outside of them. When you spend decades chasing approval through compliance, you eventually realize you've traded your own values for someone else's expectations. You've built a life that might look solid from the outside, but on the inside it feels like wearing a suit 2 sizes too small. The uncomfortable truth? If you want a life that actually feels real, one you recognize as yours, you have to stop asking for permission to live it. That doesn't mean throwing caution to the wind or becoming irresponsible. It means becoming responsible, able to respond to your own needs, your own instincts, your own definition of success. It means shifting from what will they think to what do I think. From what's expected of me to what's true for me. For some men, that realization comes with a rush of freedom. For others, it's terrifying. Because the moment you stop following someone else's map, you can't just coast. You have to decide where you're going. But here's the payoff. Once you start making choices based on what matters to you, life stops feeling like an endless to-do list. It starts feeling like something you're actually part of, not just something you're enduring. And that's why this first lie is so dangerous. It's not just about work, it's about how you measure your entire life. Break this belief, and you start to see every other lie for what it is. Because if the work hard, follow the rules formula doesn't guarantee happiness, then maybe the rest of the rules you've been following deserve a second look too. And that leads us straight to the next lie, one that doesn't just shape how you work, but who you believe you are. For decades, when someone asked, "So, who are you?" your answer was probably automatic. You stummin' engineer. You system manager. You spun-up cop. Or maybe you just say, "I stum the breadwinner." And for a long time, that answer felt solid. It wasn't just what you did, it was who you were. It was your role, your responsibility, your identity. The provider, the one everyone could count on, the man who kept the lights on, the fridge full, and the bills paid. There's nothing wrong with that role. In fact, there's honor in it. But here's where it gets dangerous. When that role becomes the scaffolding of your entire sense of self, because what happens when that scaffolding gets pulled away? It could be retirement, a layoff, a business closing, a divorce, your kids growing up and moving out, or maybe your partner starts earning more than you do. Suddenly, the way you've defined yourself for decades starts to crumble. And in that silence, a question you avoided for years comes roaring to the surface. If I'm not essential to someone else's survival, then who the hell am I? If I'm not producing value for other people through a paycheck, through providing, through solving everyone else's problems, then what's my value? This identity crisis isn't an accident. It's not some fluke of aging. It's actually baked into the system. When your worth is tied entirely to your utility, you never have to confront the deeper, more uncomfortable question of who you actually are beneath all the doing. You never have to build a relationship with yourself that isn't based on how useful you are to others. You just keep producing, keep providing, keep performing. And as long as you're doing those things, you can avoid looking in the mirror and wondering if there's more to you than the job description. But when life strips that role away by choice or by force, you suddenly find yourself in unfamiliar territory. And here's the truth. That moment isn't a crisis. It's an invitation. An invitation to discover that your value is not based on your productivity. Your worth isn't determined by your paycheck, your title, or how much your family depends on you. You are not your job. You are not your utility. And you don't stop being valuable the moment you stop producing something for others. The man you are at your core, the one with curiosities, stories, scars, wisdom, and humor. That man exists independent of any role you played. He's been there the whole time. But maybe you buried him under decades of doing. This is why so many men struggle after retirement. It's not that they miss the work. They miss the identity. They miss being someone in the eyes of others because they haven't learned how to be someone in their own eyes. I've seen men who, once they left their jobs, felt invisible. They'd go from being a respected leader in the office to just another face in the grocery store aisle. And without the validation of that role, they didn't know how to stand tall anymore. But here's the shift. When you stop basing your identity on what you do and start grounding it in who you are, you realize that no layoff, no divorce, no financial downturn can take that away from you. Who you are is the man who's lived through storms and survived, the man who's learned hard lessons and is still willing to learn more, the man who can sit in a room with no title, no paycheck, no applause, and still know his life has weight. This isn't about dismissing your role as a provider. It's about expanding your identity beyond it, because when you do that, you stop living in fear of losing it. Imagine this. You retire, and instead of feeling lost, you finally have the freedom to explore what you've always been curious about. You get laid off, and instead of feeling worthless, you see it as a chance to shift towards something more aligned with your values. Your kids grow up and move out, and instead of clinging to the past, you pour that energy into building a richer life for yourself and them. You're no longer defined by how essential you are to someone else's survival. You're defined by how fully you're living your own. And here's the kicker. When you operate from that place, you actually become more valuable to the people you love. Not because you're fixing everything for them, but because you're showing up whole. They get to experience the real you, the man who has more to give than just his labor or his paycheck. It's a different kind of leadership, one that isn't about control or provision alone. It's about presence, wisdom, and authenticity. So, if you've been clinging to that provider role like a life raft, it might be time to loosen your grip. The raft kept you afloat, but it was never the destination. And the shore you're heading toward, it's called freedom from conditional worth. And once you reach it, the next lie we're going to talk about will make even more sense, because it's the one that hides inside the place you'd least expect, your own marriage. From the time you first started dating, you probably absorbed a clear message, sometimes said outright, sometimes implied. If you love her, you self-sacrifice. And for a lot of men, that message becomes the guiding principle of their marriage. Be the provider, keep the peace. Put her needs first. Don't rock the boat. Avoid conflict at all costs. If there's a choice between your happiness and harmony, choose harmony. It sounds noble. It sounds selfless. It even sounds romantic, at least in theory. But here's the danger. Over time, sacrifice stops being an act of love and starts becoming a slow erasure of who you are. I've talked to countless men who've lived this out. It starts small, skipping a hobby you love because it takes time away from the relationship, avoiding certain conversations because you don't want to upset her, saying yes when you want to say no. At first, it feels like compromise, like you're doing the mature thing. But over the years, something subtle happens. You start disappearing. You stop bringing your full self to the marriage. You mute your opinions. You hide your needs. You bury your frustrations under polite smiles and reassuring nods. And while this keeps the waters calm for a while, it slowly drains the life out of the relationship. Here's the truth no one tells you. Authenticity isn't optional in intimacy. When you choose peacekeeping over truth-telling for too long, you're not protecting the relationship, you're protecting it from reality. And that's not the same thing. Think about it. The woman you married probably didn't fall in love with a yes man. She fell in love with you, your quirks, your convictions, your sense of humor, your stubborn streak. She fell in love with the man who had dreams, opinions, boundaries, and a backbone. When you shrink yourself into constant accommodation, you rob her of the chance to love the real you, and you rob yourself of the chance to be loved for who you actually are. And here's where it gets ironic. The more you disappear into sacrifice, the weaker the relationship becomes. It's like trying to build a bridge with only one side holding weight. It can't stay balanced forever. Real partnership isn't about one person getting smaller so the other can feel comfortable. It's about both people growing into their full selves and choosing each other from that place of strength. Sometimes that means conflict. Sometimes it means saying, "I don't agree." Sometimes it means having uncomfortable conversations that risk shaking the peace in the short term so you can protect the truth in the long term. I know men who've avoided these conversations for years until one day they found themselves in a marriage that was polite but empty. The intimacy was gone, not because they didn't love each other, but because they stopped showing up honestly. And here's the thing, your marriage can survive conflict. What it can't survive is the slow death of two people pretending everything's fine when it's not. Healthy compromise is about finding common ground while staying true to yourself. Unhealthy sacrifice is about abandoning yourself to avoid discomfort.
And I get it. Many men fear that speaking up will cause damage.
That being honest about what they want or need will make them seem selfish. But the opposite is usually true. In fact, most partners can feel when you're holding something back. They might not know what it is, but they can sense the distance. And that distance, that's what actually erodes trust. Imagine a different approach. You express your needs without blame. You share your frustrations as they arise instead of letting them pile up into resentment. You bring your full self into the marriage, your humor, your flaws, your ideas, your preferences. This doesn't make you difficult. It makes you real. And when you're real, you give your partner the chance to love someone who's alive, not just accommodating. It also changes the energy in the relationship. You stop relating to each other as caretaker and dependent, and start relating as equals, two whole people who choose to be together rather than two halves trying to merge into something that feels safe but dull. One of the best pieces of advice I ever heard about marriage was this: don't protect the relationship from the truth. Protect the relationship with the truth. It steps a subtle difference, but it steps everything. And when you start practicing that, you'll notice something surprising. You feel more confident, more connected, and more respected. Not because you're demanding it, but because you're showing up as the kind of man who's worth respecting. And here's where this connects to our next lie, because a lot of men think they're keeping their marriage strong by keeping the peace. But in reality, they're just managing emotions, smoothing over tension, and avoiding the very conversations that could make the relationship deeper. The next lie we're going to unpack, it's the one that convinces you that if you just keep everything calm, everything will be fine. If you're like most men, you've probably been trained, subtly or not, to be the emotional shock absorber in your relationships. Your job: keep things smooth. Avoid drama, make sure everyone's comfortable. Keep the boat steady, no matter how rough the water gets. And on the surface, that seems like a good thing. After all, Who doesn't want a calm household? Who doesn't want to avoid unnecessary conflict? But here's the catch. Peacekeeping is not the same thing as peace. Peacekeeping is management. Real peace is connection. And when you spend years managing emotions instead of addressing them, something toxic starts to grow under the surface. It's called resentment. Resentment doesn't announce itself with fireworks. It seeps in slowly. It builds every time you swallow a truth instead of speaking it. Every time you say it's fine when it's not fine. Every time you let something slide to keep things comfortable, but secretly wish you'd stood your ground. And the thing about resentment is that it doesn't just disappear on its own. It waits, it simmers, and eventually it spills out, sometimes in an explosion, sometimes in quiet withdrawal. Either way, it's corrosive. Psychologists even have a term for the fake calm that peacekeeping creates: pseudo-intimacy. Everyone smiles, nods, and gets along on the surface, but nothing real is happening underneath. The relationship becomes a performance. You go through the motions of connection without actually connecting. You avoid the hard conversations. You pretend disagreements don't matter. You tell yourself you're being mature, but really, you're just avoiding discomfort. And here's the irony. Peacekeeping to protect the relationship actually weakens it. Because without truth, there can't be trust. And without trust, there's no real closeness. If you've ever heard your partner say something like, "I feel like you're here, but you're not really here," that's the echo of this pattern. You're physically present, but emotionally absent. You've become the diplomat, skilled at smoothing things over but hard to really know. And it's not just your partner who feels it. Your kids feel it. They learn by watching you that emotions should be hidden, not expressed. Your friends feel it. They sense that conversations stay in safe territory, never venturing into anything raw or meaningful. And over time, that false peace becomes exhausting to maintain. You start to feel like you're acting all the time, polite, agreeable, easygoing. But underneath, there's this steady hum of frustration you can't quite name. Here's the counterintuitive truth. The relationships that survive conflict are often stronger than the ones that avoid it. When you can disagree and still love each other, when you can say, "This isn't working for me," without it meaning, "I don't love you," when you can hear each other out, even when it's uncomfortable, that's when real intimacy becomes possible. Because the goal isn't to eliminate all tension. It's to transform tension into connection. That requires showing up with the full range of who you are, not just the pleasant, agreeable parts. It means trusting that your partner, your family, your friends can handle your truth. And if they can't, that's information you need too. I once heard someone put it perfectly. If the only way to keep a relationship is to hide who you are, you don't really have a relationship, you have a contract to avoid reality together. And I get it, it's scary to break that contract. It's scary to risk conflict when you've been taught your whole life to avoid it. But what's the alternative? Living the rest of your life as a watered-down version of yourself, hoping nobody notices the parts you've hidden. Real peace is built on truth. Sometimes that truth is uncomfortable. Sometimes it's messy. But once it's out in the open, it can be worked through. And when you work through it, you create the kind of bond that's worth having, because it's real. And here's the link to the next lie. A lot of men who play the peacekeeper role are also chasing another illusion, the one that says success is about external scorecards, status, stuff, the house, the title, the car, the reputation. Which brings us to lie number 5, and this one might sting a little. From the time you were a young man, you were handed a checklist for success. Get the better job, buy the nicer car, get the bigger house, make sure your retirement account is growing, earn the respect of your peers. And so, you did what most men do. You started climbing. Each promotion, each purchase, each achievement felt like proof that you were getting somewhere. It was validation. It was a way to measure your progress in a world that never stops keeping score. For years, that system works, or at least it feels like it does. You get the new title. You upgrade the car. You hit the next financial milestone. And each time you get that little rush of accomplishment, that momentary sense of, I said doing it. But something strange happens when you reach your 50s. The victories start to feel, the bigger house is just more to clean. The fancy car loses its shine after a few months. The promotion that once felt like the ultimate goal starts to feel like just another box you've ticked. And that sense of satisfaction you were chasing, it fades faster each time. It's not because you're ungrateful. It's not because you're too old to enjoy it. And it's definitely not because you've lost ambition. It's because you're starting to see the truth. External achievements, no matter how impressive, can't fill an internal void. There's a restlessness that creeps in, a sense that you've been chasing someone else's definition of success. Maybe it's society's, maybe it's your parents', maybe it's the one you created when you were 25 before you really knew yourself. And now, with decades of life behind you, you can feel that definition starting to crumble. This isn't a midlife crisis. This isn't hysteria. This is your inner wisdom finally getting loud enough to drown out the noise. Your soul is trying to tell you something important. Acquisition is not the same as fulfillment. Achievement is not the same as meaning. Approval from others is not the same as self-respect. The problem isn't that you wanted nice things or worked hard to achieve them. There's nothing wrong with enjoying the fruits of your labor. The problem is when your identity becomes scaffolded entirely around external validation. Because here's the dangerous part. When your sense of worth depends on things you can't fully control, you put your happiness on a leash. Market conditions change. Other people's opinions change. Social definitions of success change, and when they do, your self-esteem gets dragged around like it's tied to someone else's hand. Real success, it's quieter. It's not flashy. It's not about how much you've accumulated. It's about how much alignment there is between what you value and how you actually live. It's waking up and recognizing the person in the mirror, not just as the guy who built all this, but as someone who's proud of how he's living right now. It's going to bed knowing your day wasn't just about ticking boxes, but about serving something that matters to you, whether or not it impresses anyone else. I know men who have traded high-paying jobs for simpler lives and never looked back. They didn't do it because they were lazy or unambitious. They did it because they realized the game they were playing wasn't giving them the life they actually wanted. I've also met men who stayed in the high-status lane but shifted the way they played, focusing on impact, creativity, or mentorship instead of just chasing the next title. In both cases, the turning point was the same. They stopped letting the scoreboard define them. So here's the question that matters. Am I becoming the version of myself that I believe I'm meant to be? Not, have I achieved enough? Not, do I have as much as him? Not, what will they think? Just, am I living in a way that feels honest, meaningful, and true? And here's why this matters more than ever. After 50, the second half of your life isn't a dress rehearsal. The years ahead are too valuable to spend chasing trophies you don't actually care about. You've already proven you can climb the ladder. The question now is, do you still want to be on that ladder at all? Or is there another path you've been ignoring because it doesn't fit the status and stuff story you were handed? Breaking this lie is liberating. It's the moment you stop measuring your worth in square footage, salary brackets, and the size of your watch face. You start measuring it in alignment, presence, and peace. And when you let go of the external scoreboard, something amazing happens. You realize it's never too late to change the game entirely. Which is exactly where we are headed next. Because the next lie men over 50 often believe, the one that keeps them stuck in roles and routines that no longer fit, is this: it's too late to change. Of all the lies men over 50 tell themselves, this might be the most seductive. It sounds reasonable, mature even. This is just who I am now. I've made my bed. Now I still lie in it. That ship has sailed. On the surface, it feels like acceptance. But dig a little deeper and you'll see it for what it really is. Resignation dressed up as wisdom. The idea that you can't make meaningful changes after a certain age is one of the biggest myths keeping good men stuck in lives they've quietly outgrown. Maybe you've said it yourself, or maybe you've just thought it when an idea popped into your head: starting a new career, moving to a different place, ending a relationship that's been dead for years, going back to school, writing the book you've been talking about for decades. You get the spark, but then the doubt kicks in. I'm too old for that. It would take too long. I've already invested too much in the life I have. So you talk yourself out of it. Not because you truly believe it's impossible, but because the risk feels too big and the comfort of the familiar feels too safe. Here's the truth you might not have heard in a long time. You are not starting from scratch. You are starting from experience. By the time you're 50, you've lived through enough cycles, enough wins, enough losses, enough wrong turns to actually know what matters to you. You have hard-earned clarity that the 25-year-old version of you could never have had. That younger version of you made decisions with limited information. He chose a career path, a lifestyle, maybe even a marriage, based on the tools he had at the time, tools shaped by what his parents wanted, what society rewarded, or what seemed practical back then. But you've been around long enough to see what actually works for you and what doesn't. You know your temperament. You know your values. You know your non-negotiables. You've seen what empty achievements feel like from the inside. You've lived through the cost of ignoring your instincts. And that SIP's not a handicap, that SIP's an advantage. Changing course at 50 isn't about burning everything down. It's about course correction. It's about looking at the map, realizing you've been heading north when what you really want is west, and making the turn before you spend another decade going in the wrong direction. And here's the kicker. The choices you make now have a better chance of sticking than the ones you made in your 20s or 30s. Why? Because they're not about impressing anyone. They're about aligning with yourself. I've seen men make massive changes after 50, start new businesses, enter entirely new industries, take up passions they'd abandoned decades earlier, and thrive, not in spite of their age, but because of it. One man I know left a 30-year corporate career to become a teacher. Another sold his house, moved to a smaller place near the water, and started painting full-time. Another ended a long, loveless marriage, rebuilt his social circle from scratch, and says he feels more alive at 62 than he ever did at 32. Were these changes easy? No. Were they comfortable? Definitely not at first. But every one of them told me the same thing. The hardest part wasn't making the change. It was believing they still could. The truth is, too late is usually just code for I'm scared. And fair enough, change is scary. But the fear doesn't mean it's wrong. In fact, the fear is often a sign that you're about to do something that matters. So, if you've been telling yourself you can't change because of your age, I want you to remember this. You're not too old to become the man you were meant to be. You're finally old enough to know who that is. And here's where this ties into our final lie. Because even when a man starts reclaiming his life, there's one more message out there trying to keep him small, uncertain, and apologetic. It's the idea that masculinity itself is a problem. Somewhere in the last couple of decades, a quiet but powerful shift happened. Masculinity, once celebrated as a source of strength, stability, and protection, started being treated, in some circles, as a problem to solve. Not by everyone, but by enough voices and in enough spaces that the message sank in. Tone it down. The sit be too assertive. Don't instead take up too much space. Make sure your stare not coming across as too much. And for a lot of good men, that message hit hard. So they started second-guessing themselves. They softened their presence. They deferred when they should have spoken up. They became cautious about offering opinions, even when their experience could have added real value. Over time, some even began to feel guilty for being men at all. Now, let's be clear. There is a version of masculinity that's toxic. We've all seen it. The posturing, the domination, the fake toughness that's more about insecurity than real strength. That kind of masculinity isn't leadership, it's theater. And yes, it can cause real harm. But the solution isn't to abandon masculinity altogether. The solution is to reclaim it on your own terms. Because masculinity, in its healthiest form, is not the problem. It's part of the solution. Healthy masculinity is quiet confidence. It's presence without aggression. It's protecting without controlling. It's leading without dominating. It's having a spine and a heart. It's the man who can stand his ground in a disagreement, not to overpower someone, but because he knows what he believes. It's the man who takes responsibility, not because he has to control everything, but because he understands his role in creating stability for the people he loves. It's the man who can be a source of strength without becoming a source of fear. And here's the thing. When you live from this place of integrated masculinity, people feel it. They trust it. They're drawn to it. Not because you're loud about it, but because it's real. I've seen men who, after years of holding back, finally gave themselves permission to stand fully in their masculine energy, and it changed everything. They were more decisive, more respected, more attractive to their partners, and perhaps most importantly, they trusted themselves again. Because here's what happens when you spend too long apologizing for who you are. You become hesitant. You second-guess every move. You start shrinking in ways you don't even notice, until one day you look back and realize you've been living at half your capacity. And living at half capacity is no way to go through the second half of your life. The goal isn't to swing to the other extreme, back into chest-beating bravado and dominance. It's to land in the middle, in a place where your strength and your compassion work together. A man who embodies this balance doesn't need to prove anything. He doesn't need to control anyone. He doesn't need to apologize for existing. He just is solid, centered, reliable, present. And when you live like that, you start to see how every other lie we've talked about connects back to this one. Because to break the lie about hard work and rules, you need the courage to stand in your truth. To break the lie about your identity being your career, you need the confidence to define yourself on your own terms. To break the lie about endless sacrifice in marriage, you need the strength to be authentic even when it's uncomfortable. To break the lie about peacekeeping, you need the resolve to face conflict head-on. To break the lie about status and stuff, you need the maturity to measure success differently. To break the lie about it being too late to change, you need the belief in your own capability. Every single one of those shifts requires a version of masculinity that's not ashamed of itself, but also not chained to outdated stereotypes. So if you've been holding back, if you've been second-guessing your instincts, if you've been apologizing for being a man, maybe it's time to stop. Not to dominate, not to control, but to show up as the most honest, grounded version of yourself. Because that version, he's the one your loved ones can depend on. He's the one you can respect. And he's the one who can lead the second half of your life with clarity, purpose, and strength. And here's the best part. When you reclaim that, you don't just free yourself from this lie. You free yourself from all of them. So, we've unpacked 7 of the biggest lies men over 50 have been told and maybe believed for most of their lives. And if you've stuck with me through each one, there's a good chance at least a few of them hit close to home. Maybe one hit you right in the gut. Maybe another reminded you of a moment in your life you'd rather not think about. Here's the thing. None of this is about beating yourself up for believing these lies. You didn't invent them. They were handed to you sometimes by people who loved you, sometimes by the culture you grew up in, sometimes by the systems that benefit from keeping men predictable and contained. You inherited them the same way you inherited your last name, and for a long time, they probably even felt useful. They gave you structure. They told you where to aim. They gave you a definition of what success and manhood looked like. The problem is, those definitions were never built to last forever. They were designed for a version of you that no longer exists. The man you were at 20, 30, 40, he was operating on a different playbook. He had less experience, different priorities, and maybe more patience for playing by other people's rules. But you've outgrown that. And that's the opportunity staring you in the face right now.
Because the second half of life,
it's not just a continuation of the first half, it's a whole new game. You've got more clarity, more resilience, and if you're willing to see it, more freedom than you've ever had before. But that freedom doesn't come from doing what you stiff always done. It comes from questioning the stories you stiff been living by. It comes from holding each of these so-called truths up to the light and asking, is this still serving me, or is it holding me back? Let's just run through them one more time. You now know that working hard and following the rules doesn't guarantee happiness. It guarantees predictability, and predictability serves systems, not your soul. You've seen that your identity can't be safely built on your career or provider role because those things can be taken from you in a moment and they were never the whole of you anyway. You've learned that endless sacrifice in a relationship isn't love. It's self-erasure. Real intimacy needs two whole people, not one person disappearing to keep the other comfortable. You've recognized that keeping the peace is often just emotional management, and the absence of conflict isn't the same as the presence of connection. You've challenged the idea that success is measured in status and stuff because external scoreboards can never measure internal alignment. You've dismantled the lie that it's too late to change because change made from experience is stronger, smarter, and more intentional than change made from youth. And you've reclaimed the truth that masculinity isn't a liability when lived with integrity. It's a source of stability, leadership, and quiet strength. When you strip these lies away, what you're left with is something rare, something most men never get to experience. You're left with a life you've chosen on purpose, a life that reflects who you are now, not just who you were told to be decades ago. And yes, it can be unsettling at first. It can feel like you're stepping off the map you've been following your whole life. But here's the thing about maps. They're only useful if they lead somewhere you actually want to go. So maybe it's time to stop following someone else's directions and start drawing your own. Ask yourself, what would my life look like if I stopped playing small? If I stopped chasing trophies I don't even care about? If I stopped apologizing for who I am and started living from the strongest, most grounded version of myself? The answers to those questions might scare you. That's good. It means they matter. The men who thrive in their 50s, 60s, and beyond aren't the ones who played it the safest. They're the ones who were willing to make the shifts that aligned their life with their truth. They stopped living by a script they didn't write. They stopped being defined only by what they did for others. They stopped mistaking the absence of conflict for the presence of love. They stopped measuring their worth in stuff and started measuring it in meaning. They started making decisions that were bold, intentional, and rooted in self-respect. And here sips, what sips waiting on the other side of that? More peace. Not the fake peace of emotional management, but the real peace of living in alignment. More connection. Not the shallow kind, but the deep kind that comes from being fully known. More purpose. Not the kind handed to you by someone else, but the kind you choose for yourself. If you're listening to this and thinking, yeah, but I've been living by these lies for decades, where do I even start? Start small. Pick one lie, one story you've been telling yourself that you're ready to challenge, and begin replacing it with a truth that's actually yours. Maybe that means saying no to something you would have automatically said yes to. Maybe it means carving out time for a passion you've been putting off for years. Maybe it means finally having the uncomfortable conversation you've been avoiding. Small steps add up, and with each one, you'll feel a little more like yourself. Not the you everyone's gotten used to, but the real you. And here's my challenge to you. Don't just listen to this and nod along. Choose one action you can take this week to start living free of these lies, and then tell me about it. Drop it in the comments. Let other men see they're not the only ones waking up to this, because the more we share, the more we give each other permission to live fully. You've got more time than you think. You've got more freedom than you realize. And you've got more strength than you've been giving yourself credit for. The question is, what are you going to do with it?